Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning and good evening from wherever in the world you are joining us today here at the ICLEI Africa head office in Cape Town, the first epicenter in Africa for COVID-19, and also the focus of the discussion today. ICLEI Africa, for those who don't know, is a global organization for cities, by cities, and subnational governments from around the world. We're servicing over 2,000 cities and subnational governments committed to building a more sustainable future for humanity and for planet Earth. So as part of our COVID-19 outreach and response programs here in ICLEI, we have very regular webinars, mostly weekly webinars, focusing on different aspects that are brought to the fore around sustainability, especially during these times of COVID-19 and living through the pandemic. It is my honor as Regional Director of the ICLEI Africa office to welcome our panelists today. And I just want to, before I introduce them, ask that everybody is aware that you can switch your language at the bottom of your screen. You can go to, there's a little circle that looks like an earth. You can just click on that and you will see that you can either choose your preference of English or French, and you will then, for the duration of the webinar, hear simultaneous translation in either English or French. We are going to have French and English interventions, so please make your language choice now. And also, you're welcome to use the chat box to ask and pose questions, which we will moderate and feed through to our distinguished panelists that you see on the screen. And let me start by introducing and extending a very, very warm welcome to our distinguished panelists here today, starting with Premier Alan Winde of the Western Cape Government, the province that saw the first epicenter of the virus in South Africa and also in Africa. Welcome to Premier Alan Winde. And then also we move to the city of Cape Town, to our Mayor Dan Plato, Executive Mayor of Cape Town, Dan Plato, who has steered the city and our citizens and all of us living in the city through this pandemic, and is still doing so every day, working with our communities, in our communities. Very warm welcome to you, Mayor Dan Plato. And then also a very special guest in the form of Professor Salim Abdul Karim, a famous person with a lot of trust from the South African community and indeed the African community. Professor Abdul Karim is the chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee, giving direct advice to the Cabinet of South Africa, but also to Africa through the African COVID Task Force, from an academic and medical perspective, working on a very, very strong and strict data-driven response strategy and advice to the politicians who have steered us and are still leading us through this journey as we deal with COVID-19 in Africa. Warm welcome to you, Professor. We are also going to be joined by another distinguished professor, Professor Mustafa Mejiyawa, who is the chair of the African Center for Disease Control. And Professor Mustafa Mejiyawa is providing the whole of Africa with medical and sound academic advice, but also very practical solutions, sharing best practice and helping to steer the African community through the African Union through the pandemic, but also linking us to science, as is Professor Abdul Karim doing, science and best practice emerging so rapidly from around the world as we're getting to know this unknown pandemic better every day. Very warm welcome to Professor Mejiyawa, and thank you for joining us today. So these are the panelists, and thank you very much for joining ICLEI Africa here in our lounge, our Zoom lounge, for an intimate discussion about Cape Town, the Western Cape, Africa, and COVID-19. We are first going to start the proceedings now with all protocol observed, if I may add, with Her Excellency Fatima Abdel Malik, who is the president of the region of Nouakchott in Mauritania, who is sending us all the way from Mauritania a strong message of solidarity. In Africa, we stand together also against COVID-19, and it's wonderful to hear from Her Excellency Abdel Malik. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على النبي الكريم. Nos villes ont vécu une situation difficile avec la propagation de la pandémie COVID-19 et des conséquences fâcheuses sur la situation économique, sociale et humanitaire. Les mesures prises ont certes limité la propagation de la pandémie au prix d'une récession économique et d'une situation lamentable, avec l'arrêt de l'activité économique au moment où plus de 70% de nos populations ne trouvent refuge que dans le secteur informel. Le Covid-19 nous a enseigné que nos villes ne sont pas résilientes et que nous devons repenser nos modes de vie, nos modes d'action, nos stratégies de développement pour intégrer plus que jamais la dimension de la résilience, en plus de la dimension environnementale, sociale et économique. J'exhorte mes pairs africains à renouer avec la solidarité africaine d'antan et à œuvrer à l'ancrage de l'intersolidarité au sein de nos villes, mais aussi entre nos villes africaines. J'attire l'attention des décideurs africains que l'heure a sonné pour repenser notre planification urbaine, parce qu'encore une fois, il a été démontré que nos villes ne sont pas résilientes, mais aussi pour nous armer, nous outiller avec des moyens techniques et technologiques pour planifier, redéfinir nos besoins et hiérarchiser nos priorités, afin de garantir une autonomie alimentaire, sécuritaire et éducative. Au niveau de Nouakchott, nous avons opéré une mise à jour de notre plan de développement régional pour tenir compte de la nouvelle situation socio-économique. Je lance un appel à nos partenaires techniques et financiers afin de nous accompagner dans nos différentes approches. Je vous remercie.
Pandemic that we've never witnessed in our lives before. So Rise Africa, African capital cities, you're welcome to be here with us, and thank you for sharing this occasion. I'm now going to turn to our leaders, those people who are steering us through the pandemic day after day, sometimes through the most difficult of times. Premier Wendy, my first question goes to you. I would like for you to reflect a little bit back towards January, February, when it was probably about this time. I was probably sitting right here in our boardroom here in Cape Town, coming back from trips from Abu Dhabi, Rome. In fact, I was in Rome early February, and we knew about this new disease, and we could never in our wildest dreams imagine that our lives would be so drastically changed. At that stage, my whole office, we were planning our trips to Montreal, to Canada, to Europe, to the East, and of course into the many African cities where we work day by day on urban sustainability issues. Now that rapidly came to an end, and we don't know what the new normal is going to look like for us and for many other organizations around the world and also here. What were your first thoughts? I mean, I think it was March 5th that it hit home for the first time, that with the first case reported in South Africa. It was not in the Western Cape, but we sort of realized suddenly that we're going to be living with COVID-19. We're going to have to prepare for it. What were your first thoughts and feelings, and maybe fears and hopes in those very early days in January and February?
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to colleagues around the world. It's really an honor to be part of this webinar today. And yeah, it's an interesting question. I remember late February and early March, we were already having discussions in our region around our big events, because we are a tourism capital. We're an event, conferences and sporting event capital, and we were engaging with some of those big events. We host the biggest timed cycle race in the world, happens in early March. We have what we call the Tour de France of mountain bike races that happen. We have a range of conferences that happen, and of course the tourism season. So we were already thinking about it, and in early March, I'd already activated our JOC, or our Joint Operations Command. I still remember that case. I remember us meeting we actually met our first cabinet meeting along with our disaster management team on the 13th of March, because we were debating the epic cycle race, and we had to sort of try and advise them of whether they should continue or not. And they were getting pressure from the international participants, because it's on an international stage, as to whether this should continue or not. I still remember Saturday the 14th, I got all the administrative team in and a couple of the MECs, and we were sort of really started to plan. I've still got photographs of what the boardroom looked like, with all these notes stuck on the wall of what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And then, of course, on Sunday the 15th, we again called our expanded cabinet and disaster management team together. And that was when I got a phone call from the president to say to me that we will be now declaring a disaster in South Africa, which sort of enacts various regulatory environments. But we'd already started thinking about it. And I think probably the most important point that I try to take or to put across to our team was, I said, we have to learn from other parts of the world. And what I didn't want to do is, I didn't want to happen is, I didn't want to run out of beds in our hospitals, and I didn't want to have piles of coffins, because we saw in parts of the world how this pandemic was just consumed everything. And so I think that was my initial thought. I don't want to have coffins piling up on the one side of the spectrum at the sort of end of this process. And at the beginning I didn't want people sort of waiting in their cars at parking lots outside of our hospitals, and we couldn't service them. And I suppose that was what was consuming our everydays. And are we prepared enough? And of course, no one really knew, because it was so different, so new, and it was affecting the whole world. But we did have one bit of luck on our side, and that other parts of the world were ahead of us, ahead of the curve. And then, of course, we became the ahead of the curve in South Africa. And yeah, it was tough. It was a tough time. But that was the initial thought. So are we going to be able to be prepared enough? And we have to have some minimum requirements. I don't want to have piles of coffins, and I definitely don't want to have people waiting for hospital beds.
Thank you, and thank you for a very frank reflection and personal reflection of what went through your heart and mind in those first days. You mentioned the Joint Operation Committee, or Centre, the JOC, which became very well known in Cape Town as well a few years earlier during the drought. Were you able to tap onto those experiences that you lived through to prevent day zero, which was the day that Cape Town would run out of potable water and our taps would have literally run dry? You had a massive undertaking then, massive public awareness campaign, massive strategy with all the local governments and the city of Cape Town on board, and the national government coming on board to prevent this disaster from happening in Cape Town in 2017-18 roundabouts. What did you take from that process, and were you able to apply and learn from that as you were taking your first steps? And what were those very first steps and bold steps that you took in these early days of the pandemic, March, April? Could you allude a little bit on that?
So can I first say absolutely. And not only day zero and our sort of drought, the most severe drought in living memory, or 100 years, there are all sorts of measurements. I think, my first sort of recollection of really working together between spheres of government, private sector, was actually when I first got into government, even earlier than that, and that was delivering the World Cup. And so there, we really started to learn how to work together. I even think about dealing with even smaller pandemics. We had an avian influenza outbreak in our region, and how did we manage that? And you definitely learn as you go through any of these crises that come your way. But I suppose you can never be prepared for the magnitude of COVID-19. I mean, it was something that really consumed us day and night. But I want to say, first of all, that definitely we learned many things. I think about the regularity of meetings during the day zero and how we had to get behavior change in amongst civil society. You know, it's all very well, you know, trying to manage the usage of water, but if you don't get your citizens to play their part, you're never going to succeed. And I mean, I think that during day zero, I mean, in the city of Cape Town, and I'm sure the mayor's going to talk a little bit more about that, but I mean, we got water usage down that had never been done anywhere else in the world. We were using 1.2 billion liters of water a day, and we halved that. We more than halved that. We got it down to just over 500 million liters a day. I mean, it had never been done like that before, where our allocation of water per person was way less than anybody had ever allocated a daily volume of water. And still today, and I use it often, still today people have got buckets in their showers. Our dams are full, but we've still got buckets in our showers. We are still using less water today, even though we have now passed that problem and we've got rain and our dams are filling up. We changed behavior. So absolutely the learnings got carried through. But of course, as the magnitude of this pandemic, we took those learnings, but we took them to a new level. I mean, what really amazed me was Sundays were strategy. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were expanded cabinet. We had a cabinet meeting 3 times a week to make decisions, but we extended it so all municipal managers, all mayors of districts, and the city of Cape Town were involved in, and then of course the South African police, the military. You know, every role player was involved in these 3 meetings every week. But the thing that really amazed me was that senior government officials would be in meetings 24/7. You'd be 11 o'clock at night and you'd be sending emails and people would be answering you, and you would be sitting in Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, and people just, it was unbelievable how everyone pulled together, and these challenges were put in place. We met those challenges and more, and we learned so much. We built hospitals in weeks. We made them paperless. We developed new ways of dealing with comorbidities and minimizing risk. I mean, it really has been an absolutely amazing journey of unbelievable behavior change, compassion, and every citizen playing their part, from feeding people who are hungry to volunteering to really just going above and beyond. So while it's been a scary journey, it's been a heartwarming journey of how people really step up to the plate.
Thank you, Premier. Let's move to Mayor Dan Plater. Mayor, quite early on in the pandemic days here in Cape Town, we saw that the fault lines around socioeconomic challenges were just coming to the fore. And all the while, you had to basically carry on with basic services, much needed basic services in and around Cape Town. It's quite a large city to manage with heavy challenges. But with COVID-19, it became so much more immediate, so much more real for many people. They needed to access food, they needed to access water, and they had other needs, medical needs, etc. How were you able to carry on with your ongoing service delivery on a daily basis, making the city function, still collecting waste, making sure there's water in our taps, making sure that our traffic lights are working and that the city is functioning and we could pay our bills, etc. How did you find managing and balancing all these things in managing such a large city? I think Mayor Dan Plato is just off the line, so we're going to return to him in a minute. But in the meantime, while the Mayor is joining us again, let's move on to Professor Salim Abdul Karim, the Chair of the South African Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19 and also member of the African Task Force for Coronavirus. Professor Karim has got a long history and a very renowned profile around the world as an esteemed academic specializing in pandemics and in this field of epidemiology. So Professor Salim, you soon became a calm and trusted voice for so many of us here in South Africa. We heard you speak, we saw you speak, we saw you making wonderful presentations, academically sound, informed by data, and we trusted in you to lead us through with sound medical expertise and a wonderful panel that you worked with in those early days. What stood out for you, medically speaking, from the leaders of these two subnational governments, the Western Cape government and the city of Cape Town, in those early days as the Western Cape then became the first epicenter? Medically speaking, what were the lessons you learned? What were your fears? What was your interpretation of how they were handling things and in line with the advice that you were giving at the time?
Thanks very much, Ms. Brand, for that question. Let me just start by saying a big thank you for inviting me. As I think back, as I reflect on what stood out, for me, it was the uncertainty. It's a situation where we don't really understand this virus. I mean, I knew about the other 4 common coronaviruses, but this novel coronavirus, there was so little empiric data and very little data about what to do about it. But it's in these periods of uncertainty that leadership is important. It is in these periods that leadership is in a position to understand that the risks are high, but that the decisions have to be taken, even if the benefits are not clear. It's that ability to make the difficult decisions to act that becomes important, and that's where leadership is important. And it's in these periods of uncertainty that you get to see what effective leadership is about. Not just people who are hot air and who stand on soapboxes, but people who actually understand where people are and how to take them from where they are to where we need to go. I'll give you one example of what I call effective leadership. If you had to ask me in February this year, can you take the Cape Town ICC and convert it into an 800-bed hospital? And I want you to provide oxygen at every one of those beds, and I want you to create an ICU facility. And I'd like you to do all of that in 6 weeks. I would say, are you crazy? Do you even understand what it takes to do that? That's when you look at an airport and you see airplanes landing and taking off and you think, that's it, that's an airport. No, airports are complicated organizations and structures. Hospitals are even more complicated. Just think about it. You need X-ray facilities, you need kitchens to cook, you need laboratories for tests and so on. Is it really possible? I would have said no. Well, we had effective leadership because they did it. They did it. We had a functioning, capable field hospital in the Cape Town ICC. Fortunately, we didn't need all 800 beds, but we used up to about 500 of those beds. That's how important a role this played. Importantly, that the risks were high, the benefits were unclear, but the decision-making and the leadership did the right thing. And that's what I see as the thing that stood out for me.
Well, I think this is music to the ears of so many governors and mayors and premiers around the world, because we saw that working in the subnational and city space as ICLEI, we saw very brave mayors and governors and premiers stepping up to the fore, sometimes with little knowledge and sometimes with little equipment and even resources at their disposal and information coming through to them, rising to the occasion, because a pandemic like this really does play out, as you say, on the ground at the local level. And it's there where that leadership counts. So thank you so much for highlighting the need for strong leadership at the local and subnational level. This is also true, of course, for all the Sustainable Development Goals altogether. And health, climate change, all these things are deeply connected. So we need strong leadership at the local level, and thank you for highlighting that. I want to ask you, we saw amazing partnerships emerging, unusual partnerships emerging, the private sector stepping up, all levels of government taking hands in this pandemic in the Western Cape, national government coming to the fore, deploying the National Army to support. So partnerships were also very much key to this. In the medical community, I think you also worked with partners from the private sector in ways that perhaps isn't that usual or wouldn't be expected to emerge. So what were you thinking and what would you like to learn and take forward from these type of partnerships and whole of society and whole of government approaches that we saw over the last 6 months and still seeing today as we're working our way through the pandemic here in South Africa?
I think we saw that when you are trying to deal with adversity, that those who are most successful are those who understand our fundamental interdependence. Those who have chosen to go with me first, it's all about what I want and what, the individualism that emerges, are those countries that have seen disastrous responses to the epidemic. I mean, nowhere is that more clear than in the US. We can never have a situation where we can believe that we can be safe or I can be safe when you are not safe. This virus is about how it spreads from you to me or me to you. You are safe because I am safe. I am safe because you are safe. That interdependence is fundamental to our approach. And that applies across the board. It applies to the way in which we look at our partnerships. It applies to the way in which we look at the private sector, the public sector. We look at the health response, the social response. We look at all our different components, as that each of these goes together to make the whole. And that when we appreciate and work with each other, we are strong. When we are divided and we are quibbling amongst each other, we are weak. And this virus knows how to exploit weakness. The moment we are weak, it uses that as an opportunity to spread. You get super spreading events, you get opportunities that before you know it, this virus gets ahead of you. It was indeed for me a pleasure and an honor to have worked closely with the Western Cape Department of Health. I had repeated calls with them. We had all kinds of discussions with them. We learned from each other. We talked about the 8-stage strategy we developed at a national level. How is the Western Cape implementing that? And as they went through the epidemic, we learned from them. They became the teachers and telling us what they did, what they learned was wrong, what they learned was right. And it's really that strength. And in South Africa, we are blessed with the ability to really understand each other and work with each other in the principle of Ubuntu.
Professor, I want to ask you one more question, this time focusing on Khayelitsha. The reason why I want to focus on Khayelitsha, for those who don't know Cape Town, is one of the largest but also poorest and most densely populated suburbs in the city. And we heard through the press and from many academics, economists, medical professionals, etc., that the real test for Africa about winning or losing the struggle, I wouldn't call it a fight, but a struggle against this pandemic, is going to be how well we fare in a suburb like Khayelitsha, where people live in very, very close quarters, small houses, basic services are sometimes not always being able to be provided to them. And how did you feel about these type of rumors going around that this may spread like a wildfire in places like Khayelitsha, and it could be a doomsday statement that could sweep up the rest of the continent? We didn't really see up till now this really happening in Africa, where a lot of informality exists in our cities, and actually where our cities are growing in terms of informality. We didn't see this really happening in Khayelitsha, but how did you feel? Were you ever afraid of something like that, a doomsday scenario in our informal settlements? Were you afraid that we're not doing enough, that we wouldn't be able to respond? What were your thoughts and fears in those first early days of the pandemic hitting the city?
Oh, Ms. Brand, you didn't warn me that you're asking difficult questions. I was expecting only easy ones. Well, I was never afraid. We have to take the good with the bad, the difficult with the easy. We knew right at the beginning, based on the evidence we saw from China, that we would have to depend on two key strategies. At that stage, social distancing and hand washing. Mask wearing wasn't clear-cut at that stage, but we put it in the pot as well. When I think about that you need social distancing and hand washing, and then you tell me about Khayelitsha, and I'm thinking to myself, how are they going to do social distancing? How are they going to wash their hands frequently? I began to think about the real challenges that made. And it's not unique to Khayelitsha, it applies equally to the township I live near, Amlazi, or in Alexander, in Gauteng. And I think that we always knew that we would have those challenges. But I didn't really fully appreciate how central a role essential services and shops would play, grocery stores and supermarkets would play in stimulating and leading to the epidemic in these settings. When I look at the early spread of this virus in Khayelitsha, and I remember sitting with Keith Kluti and looking at the data in Khayelitsha, and he was showing me the numbers and the diagrams, and I said, goodness, you got a problem here. And I didn't fully appreciate how important the Khayelitsha spa would be to the way the epidemic grew in concentric circles. And before we knew it, general community transmission. But that's not a reason to panic. That's not a reason to get scared. That's a reason to begin to understand better, to appreciate that we will have the necessary information and that we can draw on what evidence there is, and we have the tools. We've just got to have the energy and the effort to put it in place and to try and get it implemented. And I think we saw Premier Wendy describe that. We've got to change behavior. He changed it for water. We've got to change it for mask wearing. We've got to change it for, washing hands. And that eventually is what paid dividends. And so I feel that those early concerns, whether they were warranted or not, the correct actions were taken. Preparations were done and actions were implemented that led us on a path where today we can say that our coronavirus threat is now at a minimum.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're going to come back to you, Professor, but let's try once again. Mayor Dan Plater, I just want to make sure if you can hear me and if you are connected, because we'd really like to bring you into this discussion. Mayor?
Can you hear me? I'm connected. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us, Mayor Dan Plater. Cape Town and the Western Cape are long-standing members of ICLEI, at the forefront of sustainability, driving sustainability for many, many decades. And I'm very proud to be a Cape Townian. And for me, it's a real honor to be speaking to you today, Mayor, from our offices here in Cape Town.
Thank
I
you.
want to ask you, during those early days, you know, it was very clear that the fault lines of the socioeconomic divide in South Africa showed up so very clearly through COVID-19. We saw a more intense need for people to access basic services like food, shelter, water, just basic survival tools that they needed more than ever, as many people were put out of jobs, many people couldn't go to work, basically transport came to a halt in many places, but you had to keep on running a city. You have a big staff component who never stopped working. You never laid tools down. So tell me, how did you manage, how did you balance all these different acts of running a very big and complex and difficult city to run so efficiently, and at the same time deal with COVID-19 with so many unknowns? Please reflect on that for us, Mayor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, Kobe. Good to see you once again after such a long time. And also to all the other participants, we are very honored to be part of your program. Look, as Premier Alan Windey said, at the beginning stages of COVID-19, we said to ourselves, what is happening with the world out there and what is going to happen in Cape Town? It was really an unknown kind of phenomena and unknown kind of a scenario. We rely on what's happening across the world and that sort of thing, but you're quite right. As a city, we had to follow national and provincial guidelines and directives and that sort of thing. And as a municipality, and one of the biggest in South Africa, the issue with regard to basic services was very, very important. And that interlink very, very closely with fighting the virus and to make sure that critical service delivery measures stay intact and in place. And we took a hat off for our frontline staff, the staff that needs to ensure there is clean water in the taps. And I think that was very, very important. And looking, you made a reference to the informal settlement areas, your reference to Khayelitsha and that sort of thing, but also the Nyangas and the Dunoons and the Greater Philippines and other areas, and to make sure that there's clean water to those informal areas. And we had to procure trucks and the tankers on it, and to make sure on a day-to-day basis that clean water gets drive into those settlements for people to wash their hands, to clean themselves, and that sort of thing. The other issue was to make sure about general cleanliness of the environment, to make sure that the rubbish bins are cleaned at least once a week, that dirt gets picked up where people throw dirt around and that sort of thing. But also very, very important that street lights are working, that general services doesn't collapse. And I think the city made pretty sure about that. And our frontline staff, our senior staff, my office staff, even the staff of the Premier were on duty through scary times, scary moments, to ensure that those issues is in place. But then also other issues we had to make sure about, and to assist provincial government to complement what province are doing, that our health sector is intact, and our health sector assists provincial government going out, screening people, testing, etc. But also humanitarian food aid was a major issue for us. Apart from the services we had to render, I'm very pleased and happy with how we go around that. But the issue about hunger was for me a kind of an issue we had to tackle with great interest. We had to make sure people receive the necessary food. We capacitate soup kitchens big time in the city of Cape Town. As a city, we provide them with the necessary ingredients, because we could not only want to focus on the handing out of food parcels. We realized very quickly food parcels on its own is not sustainable. But the scary aspect of food parcels, and where I have said COVID is here, with people losing their jobs, people being unemployed, people supposed to be self-sufficient for many years, never had to ask government for any assistance. And the first calls begin to stream in, people saying, I need to suck my pride. I believe, I see on social media, you provide some aid. My wife and I have said, we have no choice. Now, for the first time in our lives, we need to ask government, please come and assist us. Bring to my house a food parcel or food aid or whatever the case might be. We had to make sure, big time, millions and millions of rands. We had to budget for that. Provincial government assists with their macro budget. I think maybe Premier Wendy did not mention it, but I think their budget was standing at a macro 35 million rand for food aid in the province, including the metro city of Cape Town. And we complement that with our millions of rands and so on, so that we can hand out across the city thousands and tens of thousands of food parcels, but even plates of food and that sort of thing. So we would never be able to do all of this on our own. And you're talking about the issue about partnerships. We learn very quickly. We as a city have to pull together to make this to work. MACO and ENT at least once or twice in meetings every week. And then also our staff need to rush to province to the Premier's 2 to 3 meetings a week. And apart from the loads and loads of planning and meetings and that sort of thing, there must be time for implementation as well. Now, it is the meetings where decisions gets made, and then it is to carry that over to other staff on the ground, the area managers and people, and they need to go and implement and to monitor the implementation and to make sure each and every implementation is running according to specification, that there is no problems, no hiccups and that sort of thing. All of those was done, and I think that helped to contain the virus, the spread of the virus and that sort of thing. Also, as part of the role of the municipality to assist, even to make sure we adhere to things like social distancing at shopping centers when people go and buy and that sort of thing, social distancing at taxi ranks, the sanitizing of the taxis, and with provincial government. It was a macro partnership between entities of state unfolding, and I don't think the Premier will hold it against me if I'm saying that province would have struggled to do it on its own, and equally the city would have struggled to doing it on its own. Fact of the matter, we needed one another. We just had to make it work, and I can safely say that we have done it. And if we need to do it again, I think we will mastermind it. Even looking at our shelters for homeless, looking at how we treat the homeless people, how we treat those without shelter, the Strandfontein site, the Bellville site, the Culemborg site, all of those, we could show as a city and as a province really our resilience. Are pulling together, are working together, investing in the frontline staff, making it easier for the frontline staff, for them to make decisions and to excel. And I think all in all, it have done wonders for the whole of the citizens of the city of Cape Town.
Mayor, just as a quick follow-up question, and with a short reply, I know you've got a specific passion for community security and safety, and how did you find issues around that in the early days and also in the months that followed up until now. The national government deployed the army across the country and also here in your city. How did you work together, and did you ever feel that community security and safety was going to get out of hand?
Look, one never knew how it would turn out, and that is why we support the deployment of the army. And we roll out the red carpet for them as far as possible to ensure the safety of the residents and citizens. And I can say to you now, with the assistance of the army, it have done wonders, because during the COVID period of time, and specifically the first 2 to 3 months, the criminality figure in Cape Town overall was relatively low. So the investment of the army did play a major role, alongside with Metro Police and law enforcement, and also looking at the role played by our neighborhood watches and walking buses as well.
Thank you very much, Mayor Plater. I now want to take us on a journey, a very personal journey, to a dear friend of ours, a colleague of ours, Ms. Dora Zatu. She's an ICLEI Africa colleague, and Dora has agreed to tell us a very personal story. She's a project finance officer here at our office, working right through the pandemic, even if mostly from home, and she kindly agreed to share her, in my view, very brave, exceptionally brave experience in living and working and surviving through these uncharted waters over the last 7 months. Dora, over to you.
Hi, my name is Dora. I stay in Bottasach. I grew up in Nyanga, New Crossroads. Between my husband and I, we have 7 children. Immediately when it was announced that we're going to be on lockdown for 21 days, the first thing we thought about was the children, because not all of them are staying with us. The other 2 that were staying with their mother in Nyanga, so they moved in with us. So I ended up with 6 children. So around May, my husband also contracted the disease. So it was difficult for us, because now suddenly there's so many of us in the house, so he had to move out of the house. We couldn't go visit him. Like, we would go and send him the food, stand at the gate, and then takes the food and then it goes in. So I guess also he was missing, his own comfort, and he felt lonely, because he had to go through this disease all by himself. And he tells us, like, there was one night for him where it was really, really hectic, that he thought that he wasn't going to make it, because it was difficult for him to breathe. Luckily, then he got healed. He was much better, but he's still trying to gain back his weight. In terms of the children, for me, suddenly now I had to cook for like so many people in the house. They miss playing outside. They missed school so much, and also the other 2 that are staying in Nyanga with their mom, they miss their mom so much, because they couldn't go to visit their mom. In fact, their mom also had COVID. So then we're like, okay, you can't go. And so it was an emotional roller coaster for the whole family. For me then, as a mother, I'm the center. I'm the engine in the house. So I have to make sure that everyone is feeling good. Sometimes it's a strain on me. One of my friends asked me, how am I coping? You're the one who's looking after all of them. Who's looking after you? So then I started seeing a therapist, just to have someone to talk to, so someone who's going to care about how I feel. I'm not just a mother at home. I'm also a professional working person. I work at ICLEI. So what's nice is that we don't have to come to the office every day. 3 days in the week I'm at the office, and then 2 days I'm at home. So when I'm at home, I just, when I have to do my work, and then I sit in my bedroom. My children, they know, I'm a very strict mom, so they know that if my door is closed, I'm busy there, I'm doing my work. When it was time to go back to school, children were so excited because I gave them options. Do you want to do homeschooling or you want to go back to school? They all said, we want to go to school. The other three, they go to school Tuesdays and Thursdays. Then there's one that goes to school on Monday and Friday. Then there's one that goes to school the whole week, and then he's off the following week. So, I have to juggle their time. They log on YouTube, or they download their own work, or the work that comes on my phone, I send it to them. They're able to do their schoolwork. Then with the little one, who is grade 1, I told them that, listen here, I'm not going to be sitting and doing grade 1 work. There's one that is a third-year varsity. 2 of them are in grade 10. One is in grade 9. Then there's one in grade 6. Then I said, you can't struggle with grade 1 work. So I'm not going to sit and do grade 1 work. You're going to be doing it. So I created like Nola's homework group. So I just send all the work there. They must decide whose turn is it to do the work. All I want to do is to have the work done. So it has also been interesting as well for me to see them, especially my other son. I said to him, I think you must do teaching. You're doing this so well, So they are really positive things that this COVID has made us see, other than the negative side of it. So yes, that's how it has affected us.
Thank you, Dora. A real life story. And also it's Dora's birthday today. So happy birthday to you, Dora. You're a big hero here for us at ICLEI. And coming back to you, Premier Wendy, if I may. You too are a COVID-19 survivor. In responding to Dora, who opened up to us, can you share some personal reflections with us about your experience? Amazingly, you kept on managing your office, you kept on doing your daily briefings, sending very clear data-driven reports to the citizens of the Western Cape, keeping up with your cabinet meetings, etc. Can you share a little bit of your experiences and how did you manage? How did you manage to do what you kept on doing? And what would be your message to Dora and the many people like Dora out there today?
First of all, can I say happy birthday, Dora? Really great to have you here on your birthday. And then thank you for that question. But I think before I get to answer about me and my journey, it's about the people that are around you. And I mean, that is, you say you kept on keeping people up to date. It's not, it's not me. I've got a huge team around me that do amazing things every single day. And I want to think about one person in specific. You heard Professor Karim talking about the engagement between the province and national, and he spoke about Dr. Keith Kluti, who is our head of department. Now, something that people don't know is Dr. Keith Kluti took over the running of the Department of Health on the 1st of April. So if ever there was sort of landing in the deep end, that was it. And I mean, jeepers, Dr. Kluti, he came out with flying colors. I mean, stepped up to the plate, but so did so many people in the team. It really was. It was something that just amazes me still today as to no matter what happened, all of us had our up days and our down days. All of us were under pressure, but people just stepped up and got the job done. And that was something that really amazed. And not only in government, I think across the board. So Dora was talking about what happened to her. You've just got to step in. You've got to make sure that someone deals with the grade 1 work. And you've got to make sure that you're keeping everyone together in this time of real trauma. I think that's something that worries me at the moment going forward. We've got 2 pandemics. Pandemic 1 is COVID-19. Pandemic 2 is the recovery from the first pandemic. And that is in this time, we've got unemployment, hunger, we've got starvation, etc., etc. And people just stepped up and are still stepping up. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey. And I also, maybe one other thing is the innovation. So you heard about Professor Karim talking about us building one hospital in a couple of weeks. We actually built 4 hospitals in a couple of weeks. The first one was in Khayelitsha, in a partnership with Médecins Sans Frontières, and how people just stepped up again and made it a paperless hospital. Those were just IT guys from the department, or ladies actually, who just stepped in, got up ladders, made it Wi-Fi connected and made it happen. We delivered medicine parcels to over 600,000 people to their homes who normally were queuing at clinics. And now suddenly, so I mean, a taxi service and partnership where people were getting to work and back. And then so, yeah, in the middle of that, I also got my opportunity. It was like 3rd time lucky. I'd quarantined myself twice beforehand because I'd been in contact with people and not got sick. My advice after getting it was, please don't get it. Keep washing your hands and keeping your social distance, because it's not a very nice virus to get. I also had further risks because of my comorbidities. I'm a diabetic, but it also amazed me how people stepped in. You know, and some days it didn't feel so good, but you had to get up there. You had to chair a meeting on a Zoom call like this. You just had to do what you had to do. You'd sworn an allegiance to the Constitution, and there are people that need to be helped. And you know, I think everyone just stepped up, no matter what. And yeah, this is an opportunity that I had to also make the most of, and make sure that you know, I played my part, just as every citizen have played their part in flattening the curve, in feeding the hungry, in working those extra hours in government. I heard a story the other day of a lady in the call center, and you know, you think about the people in our call centers are people, but when you start to get their stories about how they are the ones that were getting the phone call as there's no food parcel, and how they'd go the extra mile to make sure that that household got the food parcel. Or sometimes we'd actually hand over to our call center, not our medical staff, our general call center, that had to make the call to say you are positive. And you would hear that you'd have to phone someone you don't know. You'd tell them the results have just come in and you are COVID positive. And the person on the other end of the line would break down in tears because their husband had just passed away the previous day from COVID-19. And you've just told them they've got the virus as well. And the next thing, yeah, you're on the call crying with the person who you don't know, because you can't just put down the phone again. The sympathy and the empathy. And so it just blows your mind as to how people have stood up during this time and still are.
Thank you very much. And what an inspiring story from both Dora and from the Premier. And thank you, Premier, for sharing your very personal journey as well with us. And emphasizing that it's a team effort, and what amazing people we do have in subnational and local governments throughout South Africa, and also indeed throughout Africa. Let's now turn to a little bit of an African view before we come back to the recovery, which I hope certainly is going to be a green and very positive recovery for South Africa. Before we come back to the recovery of South Africa, may I invite His Excellency Professor Mustafa Mijiawa, who is the chair of the African Center for Disease Control. And Professor, may I first ask you to reflect a little on what you've heard so far, but also to explain to us, what should we make of the data in Africa? Many feared that Africa would be the absolute center of this pandemic in an uncontrollable way because of our scarce resources, our lack of data perhaps. Were we just lucky, or are there other factors to play? And how much do we know about the spread and the likely future scenarios for Africa? Over to you, Professor.
Right. Merci ma sœur et bonjour à son Excellence Monsieur le Premier ministre. Et je suis très heureux d'échanger avec mes sœurs et mes frères sud-africains à propos de ce sujet concernant donc la COVID-19. C'est vrai que nous avons eu la chance en Afrique d'avoir été le dernier continent touché, ce qui fait que bon, nous avons certainement eu la capacité d'anticipation. Mais avant d'arriver à ça, il y avait des prédictions alarmistes. Et je pense que les faits qui se sont déroulés depuis 6 mois n'ont pas corroboré ces prédictions-là. Et de façon générale, ça doit inciter tout le monde à un peu d'humilité dans notre capacité humaine à prédire les événements. Bon. C'est vrai qu'à ce jour, l'Afrique semble moins touchée que les autres continents et nous souhaitons ardemment que les choses aillent dans ce sens-là. Alors, tout succès, quel qu'il soit, même si vous faites des efforts, il faut probablement une dose de chance pour réussir un succès ou pour éviter un danger. Mais il y a un certain nombre de faits qu'on peut qualifier d'objectifs qui pourraient expliquer l'état de la pandémie actuellement en Afrique. D'abord, le fait que nous ayons été le dernier continent touché nous a permis de prédire et de nous préparer un peu et d'anticiper. Et en voyant les informations, en voyant le mode de transmission, en voyant également les mesures barrières et les mesures de prévention prises par l'Asie, parce que ça a commencé là-bas, ça nous a permis de nous préparer. Alors, en dehors de ça, il y a le fait que nous avons connu un certain nombre d'autres maladies, d'autres épidémies, Ebola, Lassa, et nous avons tiré un certain nombre de leçons de ces épidémies-là, parce que ces épidémies étaient survenues au moment où nous avons un système de santé qui n'était pas du tout préparé, et on a commencé donc par se préparer pour avoir un système de santé renforcé et résilient. Ensuite, toujours en prévention de cela, les leaders africains ont quand même pris un certain nombre de mesures dans nos pays. Et au niveau de l'Union africaine, il y a un leadership extraordinaire du président sud-africain, Cyril Ramaphosa, que nous saluons très respectueusement, qui a joué un rôle moteur dans son pays dans l'organisation de la riposte. Et maintenant, au niveau du continent, il y a le fait qu'il a été mis en place un fonds africain de réponse à la COVID-19. Il a été mis en place trois comités et surtout, il a été mis en place une plateforme continentale pour ce qui concerne les médicaments et les produits médicaux, parce que nous sommes confrontés déjà sans épidémie à un gros souci de rupture de stock de médicaments. Nous sommes confrontés à la question de faux médicaments et de médicaments falsifiés. Et compte tenu du fait que nos pays sont sans frontières en réalité, la porosité favorise un certain nombre de malversations et de trafic de faux médicaments. Et donc, cette plateforme, nous saluons sa venue parce qu'au-delà de la COVID, ça va nous permettre de gérer et de régler un certain nombre de problèmes liés aux médicaments, que ce soit la commande groupée, que ce soit la lutte contre le faux, que ce soit même le coût des médicaments, parce que les commandes groupées à différents niveaux et à grande échelle vont nécessairement avoir comme conséquence une réduction des coûts. Alors maintenant, c'est vrai qu'il y a le rebond de la pandémie en Europe. Ça nous fait craindre que notre continent ne subisse pas le même problème. Et c'est ce qui fait que nous sommes en train de chercher un équilibre entre les mesures drastiques que nous avons prises contre la pandémie et la gestion des conséquences socio-économiques. Mais en même temps, il faut que nos populations soient davantage éduquées pour ne pas relâcher, ne serait-ce que les mesures barrières qui ont quand même jusque-là fait la preuve de leur efficacité. Et ici, on doit faire l'effort aussi d'expliquer à la population, et c'est là où on salue d'ailleurs l'expérience sud-africaine, la participation communautaire pour que la population soit actrice de toutes les dispositions que l'on prend, parce qu'il y a un certain nombre de mesures draconiennes, que ce soit le couvre-feu, que ce soit le confinement, que ce soit le bouclage des zones, des clusters, ça ne réussit que s'il y a une adhésion de la communauté qui devient donc davantage actrice. Voilà schématiquement ce qu'on peut dire en ce moment-là concernant les prédictions que les gens avaient faites qui étaient très alarmistes, et heureusement que de grands savants se sont trompés.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive overview. And yes, as you say, the future is still very uncertain around COVID-19. Yet you must have, over the last couple of months, learned some lessons and gained some insights about how Africa can prepare for future pandemics. What do we need? Do we need more PPE? Do we need more data? Do we need more leadership? Do we need governance systems? How can we be more prepared for a next pandemic or a second wave of this pandemic if it does happen in Africa?
Oui, merci ma sœur. Et en fait, à quelque chose, malheur est bon. Parce que je crois que dans l'histoire de notre continent, c'est la première fois où face à un danger d'envergure continentale, l'Afrique se prend en charge et lève la tête pour assumer ses responsabilités. Et encore une fois, nos leaders l'ont prouvé. Alors, il y a un certain nombre d'enjeux pour demain. C'est que nous devons davantage renforcer notre système de santé pour le rendre résilient. Et quand on dit rendre le système de santé résilient, c'est au niveau de la base au sommet, et du dispensaire jusqu'à l'hôpital. Et encore une fois, renforcer davantage le dialogue avec la communauté, parce que rien ne peut se faire sans l'adhésion de la communauté. Quand vous prenez même les mesures d'hygiène basiques, ce n'est possible que s'il y a une adhésion de la communauté. Et bien évidemment, le personnel de santé doit davantage être soutenu, doit davantage être formé, que ce soit la formation continue ou la formation de base. Et bien évidemment, il est nécessaire que nos États augmentent les investissements en matière de santé. Maintenant, on doit renforcer la recherche, parce que pour l'instant, c'est le parent pauvre de notre système de santé, et la recherche, la renforcer, ça suppose quand même un financement. Et ça va permettre aussi à nos chercheurs de se prendre en charge, de se faire confiance. Nous devons nous faire confiance entre Africains aussi, faire confiance à nos chercheurs, leur donner des moyens de travail. Et par exemple, il y a certaines de nos plantes qui peuvent être utilisées, leur permettre de faire de l'expérimentation. Et de la même façon, nous avons salué certaines initiatives sud-africaines relatives au vaccin, par exemple. Et je pense que c'est la première fois que face à une épidémie, l'Afrique veut servir de point de départ d'une mesure qui pourrait avoir une portée internationale. On ne dit pas que d'emblée nous allons réussir d'un coup, mais en réalité, il faut se souvenir qu'aucun des autres continents n'a réussi d'un seul coup. C'est par essai-erreur qu'on peut avancer. Maintenant, pour ce qui est du futur, nous devons toujours tirer les leçons du passé et des leçons du présent et mettre en place des procédures opérationnelles entre nos pays, parce qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes une cinquantaine de pays. Il ne faudrait pas que chaque pays raisonne de façon isolée. Il faut qu'on ait une démarche groupée, une démarche harmonisée. Même les dispositions que nous voulons prendre contre la pandémie, par exemple, après l'ouverture des frontières terrestres, nous devons arriver à un consensus pour que nous partagions les mêmes règles et les mêmes lois, ce qui suppose bien sûr une bonne coordination entre nos différents pays. Voilà à peu près, et si on se projette sur demain, comment nous pouvons envisager.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you. Thank you so much for that inspirational input. And now, Professor Salim, if I can return to you, Professor Salim Abdul Karim. Are we safe now? Is it over? Can we relax? Is there a second wave on its way? I heard you on the radio today saying that we can now, as South Africa, may perhaps move to other levels safely from an academic, from a medical point of view. But what would you say to us as citizens of South Africa? What should be the future that we are looking forward to in the next couple of months and perhaps years around COVID-19?
Yes, when we look at the data, it's very pleasing to note that our 5 key indicators are all going in the same direction. The number of cases are coming down, the proportion testing positive is coming down, the admissions are coming down, the deaths are coming down, the excess deaths are coming down, the oxygen use is coming down. Every indicator we have is going in the right direction. We use the Lancet Commission released a statement this morning. That's the British journal, the Lancet. I'm part of the commission looking at COVID. And in our statement today, we refer to a threshold of 1 case per 100,000. Now, if we go with that as an indicator, then we are talking about South Africa can now regard itself as having a low level of transmission. The WHO uses a 5% positivity rate. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. We're not quite at 1 per 100,000, but we're getting there. 1 per 100,000 translates to less than 600 cases per day. So we are getting there, and we are close to those thresholds. So I was just commenting this morning that I think we are at a stage where we are beyond these levels. We need to move on now and say this is the new normal, that we need to continue our lives, get back to doing the things we do, provided we continue our prevention strategies, our mask wearing, hand washing, social distancing, and that we've got to institute certain restrictions, which are restrictions we're going to have to live with in the long term. And those are restrictions that really prevent, mass gatherings that lead to super spreading events, because that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid, a situation where one person can infect many others, and before we know it, we have a widespread epidemic. And so I think we have reached the stage where we don't need to be at a level anymore. We just need to be in the new normal. Are we out of the woods? Sadly, very sadly, no. When we look at the countries around us, if we look at those countries that have completed their first wave, it's about half of them have had a second wave. We are not out of the woods. We are at a continued high risk and threat of having another wave. And I think that's just part of the reality that we have to live with. And I think when I listen to my colleagues, I think they have a sense of the enormity of this challenge, because it's not here. It's not a problem we're going to deal with as a sprint. It's a problem that we have to plan and implement as a marathon. We have to live with this. We have to deal with it for several months, if not years.
Thank you, Professor. A marathon indeed, but we are ready. We see reserve. And if you watch the end of our webinar in just 10 minutes from now, we will see the reserve and the absolute brilliance of South Africans and Africans coming together. But I do now have a request from Mayor Mohammed Sefiani, who is the mayor of Chefchaouen, a city in Morocco. Mayor Sefiani wants to address a question to Mayor Dan Plater. Mayor Sefiani, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kobe. I will switch to French. Merci beaucoup, Kobe. Merci beaucoup, Ekli et l'ensemble des partenaires. Merci à l'ensemble des conférenciers et pour la pertinence de leur speech. Moi, Mohamed Siani, maire de la ville de Chefchaouen au Maroc, j'ai une question pour Monsieur le maire. Comme vous le savez, donc, cette pandémie est une crise, a provoqué une crise sanitaire, mais aussi il a provoqué une crise économique et sociale. Et nous savons que les villes ont fait face et continuent à faire face aux impacts négatifs de la pandémie COVID-19. et tout ça en utilisant des ressources humaines, les ressources logistiques et les ressources financières. Mais aussi, nous savons aussi que cette pandémie a eu un impact direct négatif sur les finances locales des villes. Et là, nous, par exemple, dans ma ville, Chefchaouen, dans plusieurs villes au Maroc et dans plusieurs villes du monde, nous avons vu que les recettes fiscales locales ont baissé d'une façon très, très importante. Mais en face de ça, nous continuons à offrir les services, à aider les gens, un certain nombre de projets d'infrastructure ne sont pas arrêtés. Et bien sûr, il fallait aussi beaucoup d'ingénierie, beaucoup de choses, mais il y a cet impact négatif. Ma question est là. Comment a vécu ça, donc cette diminution des recettes fiscales locales, cette problématique des finances locales en termes de recettes, comment ça a été vécu par la ville Cape Town et comment est-ce qu'il a arrêté les subventions aux gens, les aides alimentaires, est-ce qu'il a bloqué et suspendu un certain nombre de projets d'infrastructure vu des problématiques financières? Voilà ce que je voulais dire. Je vous remercie encore une fois.
Mayor Plater, if you want to respond.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, and I greet Mayor Sefiano. Thank you for your input and the beautiful question. Look, we as governments, as local governments, we are all into this, and I think government as a whole across the world have suffered a lot. You're quite right with your assumptions, the health crisis, social crisis, lots of crises, and one of the biggest crises is the economical crisis. Coupled to that, our financial crisis we experience. The city of Cape Town had to restructure its budget considerably. We set, and we never anticipated what it will entail and that sort of thing, but we realized almost immediately we need to reprioritize our budget. We need to channel millions of rands to food relief, to food aid. As I've said earlier in my intro, that hungriness crept in. We could see that people phoning the mayor's office want assistance and that sort of thing. And at the end of the day, it was very, very important for us to reprioritize, to channel budgets where it is most needed. We had one issue in our armory, if I can put it to you like that, that assisted us a great deal. And that is some funding in reserve, a little bit of funding we could use for COVID relief and for our COVID efforts and that sort of thing. And I can say to you that if COVID-19 are to prolong, are to carry on, the city of Cape Town will be like other cities and other metros in dire straits financially. The question is, national government don't have extra funding to provide us. Our government had to borrow, as you're aware, millions of rands from the International Monetary Fund. They also tried to borrow from the World Bank. But our limited reserves assist us big time in offsetting that against the hardships and financial losses we experience. But another 2-3 months down the line, there won't be any of those, and the city of Cape Town will suffer. We see that our tax base, many more people can't pay their property rates, they can't pay their services charges and that sort of thing. We definitely see a drop in the city's income, and but at the end of the day, we had to look at services and projects, programs, developmental programs. We could put a little bit in abeyance, we could put it a little bit on the back burner. That is how you prioritize with your officials. Our officials was quite good. They explained everything to us. We as the politicians could ask the necessary questions. We could understand why many of our projects are to be put a little bit on the back burner. What is not needed now in this financial year, let's re-look at it at the beginning of next year's financial year, or say project X, Y, and Z, we can put it in abeyance for 2 years, 2 financials, then we can only look at them again and use your revenue for you have at hand for other issues, other financial aids in your city and that sort of thing. But
thank you.
Okay, Kobe, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Plater. I want to turn finally to Premier Wendy before we end on a very high note, and please do stay tuned for that very high note. Premier Wendy, in a minute or two, please describe to us the green recovery that you foresee for the province, and what are you going to be focusing on in the next months and weeks ahead as we move forward, starting to rebuild the economy. What are your major dreams and aspirations and plans?
Okay, that's a really great question. I'm going to go to, quickly, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to a quick screensaver that I've got in my computer. And it's something I used at our cabinet the other day. I said, it's a poem, it's by Leslie Dwight, and it starts off by saying, what if 2020 isn't cancelled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from an ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't cancelled, but rather the most important year of them all. And I must say that when I first got to see or read that poem, it really rang true for me. And I think going forward, we have already said and learned so much. The way that we focused on this pandemic set a whole new way of doing government. Our cabinets will always be extended cabinets, bringing in district mayors and the city and municipalities, because this is where all of our services as a province land. This is where the people are. And so everything that we tackle now will be done differently. We learned, as you heard, we built hospitals in weeks instead of years. We changed people's lives because we understood there was a problem, we understood the urgency, and we dealt with it. And so I think that the way that we are working to the future now will be using those learnings. You asked me a question about the learnings from the drought. Well, the learnings from COVID-19, I think, are going to change the way that we operate as government forever. And we've already set ourselves the first 100 days task. In the next 100 days, we've got now a program called Jobs Now, how we're going to claw back the jobs that we've lost now during the last 6 months. In primarily the hospitality industry, in the informal sector, in construction, those where we've lost our most jobs, let's claw them back. In safety, because crime is something, gender-based violence is something that is really affecting every single person in our region. And so it's safety. And then for me, a new thing that we've brought in is called dignity. So if you've lost your job and you can't feed your family, you've lost all dignity. How do we make sure that we keep dignity while we are focusing on this future? And so jobs, safety, and dignity are the focus areas. And I think with an underlying sustainability, a new way of thinking has got to be part of how we move forward. We cannot go back to the old ways. So it is, as Professor Karim said, the new normal. And the new normal has got to be about planet, about people and place. It's got to be how we tackle the challenges, immediate challenges, and then start over the next few months to think of the medium and long term and to think of it so differently. So this year, I think, is a year that has challenged us all globally, and we've got to use this challenge now to make sure that we build that sustainable future, understanding that these things are here to allow us to learn, and let's not waste that opportunity.
Powerful, inspirational words from many leaders at the forefront of COVID-19 in South Africa, Cape Town, the Western Cape, and indeed Africa. And now I can't think of a better way to close this webinar, thanking all of you as panelists and those who joined us in our lounge today by showing you a delightful and inspirational video of the Jerusalem dance performed by the False Bay Hospital health workers, the real heroes behind the COVID-19 pandemic. Jerusalem is a uniquely South African uplifting dance gospel song by the South African DJ Master KG. The dance challenge originated in Angola and became a global trendsetter with over 130 million views on YouTube today. It has allowed nurses and doctors across the world fighting the COVID-19 pandemic to connect in a joyful manner, true to the South African and African spirit. Jerusalem.
Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami ilondoloze 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 zungangishilana ilondoloze 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 zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalema ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami
And as a last word from our side, thank you very much for joining us once again in the ICLEI Africa Zoom Lounge. We'll be bringing plenty more inspirational videos to you, inspirational stories of true leaders, of true heroes at the front face, where the rubber hits the road, in our cities, in our towns, in our provinces, across Africa. Thank you, Cape Town. Thank you, Western Cape. Thank you, Professor Salim Abdul Karim. Thank you very much, Professor from the CDC, and for all those who listened in and participated in this webinar. We're sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but we will respond to as many of those as possible. And keep watching this space. ICLEI Africa is here for our cities, for our regions, for a greener, more sustainable future, city by city, province by province. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup.
Merci, merci beaucoup.
Merci, merci.
Thank you. Bye.